The sunlight streamed through the apartment window, casting soft golden hues across the room, but inside me, darkness still weighed heavily. The distant sounds of the city seemed muffled, as if the world were suspended, waiting for my decision. While Carlos talked about the party, the music, the buffet, my mind wandered to the details of that confession from the night before. I remembered Mr. Ernest's gaze, intense, almost devouring, and the way his deep voice carried not just desire, but something deeper, something that called to me in a way I couldn't ignore. The scent of his cologne still seemed to cling to my skin, a cruel reminder that my body had already betrayed my intentions. Carlos brought me back to reality with a touch on my shoulder. "Hey, are you even listening? You're really acting strange, man. If you want to bail, there's still time," he joked, laughing. The idea should have made me laugh too, but instead, a shiver ran down my spine. Bail? For a second, I allowed myself to imagine it, leaving everything behind, running to a place where no one knew me, where I could just be myself. Free from the chains of expectations, free from the weight of promises I wasn't sure I could keep. But then the memory of Olivia's face came to mind, the sparkle in her eyes when she talked about the future, the way she held my hand with such certainty. I couldn't hurt her. I couldn't disappoint her. I took a deep breath, adjusting the collar of my suit, as if that could straighten out my thoughts too. "I'm fine. I just need some time to process everything," I lied again, trying to push the shadow of Mr. Ernest away from my heart. Carlos patted me on the back and leaned back on the couch, picking up his phone to send a few messages. And it was at that moment that my gaze fell on the door. There were still a few hours left before the wedding. And I knew that if he showed up now, if he said the right words, everything could change. The moment Mr. Ernest approached with Olivia seemed to unfold in slow motion. His gaze met mine, and for a brief second, the entire world disappeared. The guests, the church, even Olivia by his side. Only the two of us existed, and the weight of the night before. When he got close, I felt his woody cologne invade my senses, bringing with it the memories I should have forgotten. But then, instead of simply handing Olivia over to me as expected, he pulled me into a quick but firm hug. His touch was warm, his presence strong. And then came the whisper. "I enjoyed last night." My breath caught for a moment, heat rising up my neck. It was a dangerous game, and he knew it. But instead of showing any hesitation, I smirked and leaned closer to his ear. "Control yourself." He chuckled softly, a discreet smile that only I could notice, and then released Olivia with the same ease of a loving stepfather handing his daughter over to the groom. I straightened my posture and stood beside Olivia, trying to ignore the way my heart pounded in my chest. The priest began the ceremony, and I should have been fully present for this moment. But while everyone saw only a man about to get married, I felt Mr. Ernest's gaze burning into my back, and inside me, a storm still raged. The church was magnificent, a setting worthy of a fairy tale. The high ceiling was adorned with imposing Gothic arches, while the stained glass windows filtered the afternoon light, casting colorful patterns on the polished marble floor. The scent of white flowers, lilies, roses, and orchids filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of burning incense. The dark wooden pews were decorated with satin bows and small white candles, flickering gently inside glass lanterns. The altar, covered with a lace veil, stood out under a large golden crucifix that reflected the light from the grand windows. The murmur of the guests echoed through the sacred hall, creating a low, expectant soundtrack. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the solemn moment. And right there at the center of it all I stood, trying to ignore the weight of the gazes on me. But the only gaze that truly burned was his. The sun was setting, painting the sky with golden and orange hues that filtered through the church's stained glass windows, casting colorful reflections on the marble floor. The atmosphere seemed suspended in time when the priest finally asked the most important question. "Olivia, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love and cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for all the days of your life?" She smiled radiantly, her eyes shining with emotion. "I do." The guests sighed in admiration, and my heart beat hard. The priest then turned to me, and I felt the weight of the moment fall on my shoulders. "And do you take Olivia to be your lawfully wedded wife, promising to love and cherish her for all your life?" The silence lingered for a moment longer than it should have. My gaze wavered briefly, lost in the shadow of something that shouldn't have been there. But then I took a deep breath, swallowed any doubt, and said firmly, "I do." The priest smiled contentedly and continued with the final blessings. Outside, the day gave way to night, and the last rays of sunlight faded on the horizon. The church bells rang as the guests began to leave, laughing, chatting animatedly, and heading to the party venue. Olivia and I walked to the exit, while white petals were thrown over us. The world seemed to be celebrating, but inside me, something was still silent. And when my gaze met Mr. Ernest in the crowd, his enigmatic smile told me that the story between us was far from over. The party was in full swing. The golden lights hanging in the gardens illuminated the place with a warm, inviting glow, reflecting off the crystal glasses that clinked with each animated toast. The sound of music mingled with the laughter of the guests, the lively conversations, and the rustling of the leaves in the gentle night breeze. I was also drinking, the whiskey burning slightly in my throat, warming my chest, and in a way, helping to mask the restlessness inside me. Between sips, between handshakes and smiles exchanged with friends, every now and then, I bumped into Mr. Ernest. It was almost like a silent game, a dance where our bodies seemed to seek each other without drawing attention. And then, in one of those subtle encounters, he approached, the woody scent of his cologne mingling with the sweet aroma of the flowers around us. Pretending a simple greeting, he leaned into my ear, his voice low and laden with intent. "In half an hour, go to the rose bush by the pool. I want to give you something." My heart raced, but I didn't let it show. I held back a smile and, without looking directly at him, replied softly enough that only he could hear, "Okay." He walked away as if nothing had happened, leaving behind only the echo of his words and the promise of something I couldn't define, but that I undoubtedly longed to discover. The half hour passed in a blur. Every second seemed to drag and, at the same time, rush by too quickly. The sound of the party continued in the background. Laughter, music, glasses clinking, but it all seemed distant when, discreetly, I slipped away toward the garden. The rose bush by the pool was bathed in soft light, small lamps hanging from the branches casting delicate shadows on the ground. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh petals, and there, waiting for me, was him. Mr. Ernest stood with his usual firm posture, but his eyes betrayed something deeper, something that made me feel a mix of anxiety and desire. When I approached, he smiled slightly, but with that glint in his eyes that always disarmed me. "Soon it'll be your honeymoon," he murmured, his voice laden with intent. "But before that, I want to do something to you." And then it happened. Adrenaline surged through my body, every fiber of me on alert from the risk of being seen, from the tension between reason and desire. The fear of being discovered only made it all more intense, more forbidden. The world outside continued. The party went on, but there, in the dim light of the flowers and the conspiratorial silence of the night, time bent. When we finally pulled apart, the blood still pulsed strongly in my veins. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure before we returned to the party. We walked back separately, unhurried, without raising suspicions. But Olivia was already looking for me. "Love, where were you?" she asked as she found me, her eyes shining with the same innocent joy as before. I held my breath for a moment, but then I gave her a controlled smile. "I was talking with your dad," I replied, keeping my voice calm. On the other side, Mr. Ernest smiled too, complicit, trying to disguise. Olivia accepted my answer without suspicion, took my hand, and pulled me back to the party. But inside, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. Guilt weighed on my chest like a stone. The heat of the night seemed to tighten around my body, and the buzz of the party, once pleasant, now sounded distant, muffled by my own thoughts. When the waiter passed by with a gleaming tray of drinks, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a shot of whiskey without even looking, without thinking. The amber liquid glistened under the soft lights of the decorations, and before any rational thought could stop me, I downed it in one go. The alcohol burned as it went down, a hot shock that traveled down my throat and spread through my chest. I closed my eyes for a second, wishing that fire would be enough to erase what had just happened. But it wasn't. The bitter taste lingered on my tongue, just as the memory of Mr. Ernest still burned on my skin. I looked around, trying to distract myself, trying to convince myself that I was still the perfect groom, the newlywed husband everyone expected me to be. But deep down I knew nothing I drank could change what I felt. The next morning early we left for our honeymoon. The sun was rising on the horizon as we got into the car heading to the airport, and Olivia was radiant, excited about our trip. She held my hand firmly, her eyes shining with happiness, as she talked about the places she wanted to visit, the moments she imagined sharing with me. It was 5 days in a tropical paradise surrounded by crystal-clear beaches, romantic candlelit dinners, and luxurious rooms decorated with rose petals. I did everything right. I smiled, kissed her, held her in my arms like the perfect husband she saw in me. But even in the most intimate moments, there was something inside me that wouldn't fade, an unresolved desire, a forbidden memory that returned in moments of silence. When we returned, it was already late afternoon. The road seemed longer, and a certain weight settled in my chest as we approached Olivia's parents' house. As soon as we arrived, my mother-in-law opened the door with a wide smile and open arms, pulling us into a tight hug. "My dears, welcome back. How was the trip?" "It was wonderful, Mom. Everything was perfect," Olivia replied, excited, taking off her coat. Beside her, Mr. Ernest watched us. His gaze, always controlled, held mine for a moment longer than it should have. He smiled, a discreet smile, but full of hidden meanings. "Finally home," he said in a casual tone, but laden with something more. And then, while Olivia was distracted with her mother, he took a step forward and, without anyone noticing, murmured to me, his voice low and provocative. "Did you miss me?" My entire body went on alert. The game I thought I had left behind was just beginning. I smirked, maintaining my composure, but feeling my heart race slightly. Without hesitation, I replied in the same low tone, laden with hidden meanings. "Definitely." Mr. Ernest held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary, a discreet glint of satisfaction passing through his eyes. Then, with that same enigmatic smile only I could decipher, he replied, "I missed you too." It was a brief second, a silent exchange that no one else noticed, but that carried immense weight within me. The world around us continued as normal. Olivia and my mother-in-law chatted animatedly about the trip details. The atmosphere was full of warmth and welcome. But inside me, the tension returned. Because, no matter how much I tried to deny it, I knew that game wasn't over yet. In fact, it was just beginning. 2 days after our return, as I tried to get back into the routine, the phone rang. Olivia was in the shower, and without thinking much, I answered. On the other end of the line, a familiar voice sounded serious but controlled. "Good afternoon. Sorry to bother you, but I thought it best to let you know. Last night, I saw strange movements in Mr. Ernest's cabin, as if someone had entered. It could have been an animal, but either way, I thought you should know." Tension instantly shot through my body. The cabin was isolated, too far away for unexpected visitors. It didn't make sense for someone to be there. I hung up, and as I turned, I noticed Mr. Ernest already watching me intently from across the room, as if he knew something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, his voice deep but curiously calm. I quickly explained the call, and a glint of concern crossed his face, followed by an indecipherable expression. "Let's go there," he decided without hesitation. Something in his tone made me realize this wasn't just a passing inconvenience. It was something bigger, something he might have already suspected. Without discussion, we started gathering our things. We packed some clothes, flashlights, and without a word, he also grabbed a bottle of whiskey, as if he already knew we would need it. The road to the cabin was long and deserted, surrounded by trees swaying gently in the wind. The sky was overcast, with no moon to light the way. The only sounds in the car were the rumble of the engine and Mr. Ernest's controlled breathing beside me. I didn't know what we would find when we arrived, But deep down, I was sure that night would bring more than just answers. The cabin was in complete chaos. As soon as we entered, the strong smell of broken wood and upturned earth filled the air. Overturned shelves, scratched furniture, objects scattered across the floor. It was clear that a bear had broken in, rummaging through everything in search of food before disappearing into the forest. Without wasting time, we started organizing everything. First, we straightened the furniture, picked up the fallen objects, and checked if anything important had been damaged. Then we focused on the electric fence, making sure it was reinforced to prevent any more unwanted visitors. The work was intense and exhausting, and by the time we finished, it was already late at night. My body felt heavy with fatigue, and I collapsed into the armchair with a deep sigh, feeling every muscle protest from the effort. That's when Mr. Ernest reappeared, carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. His smile was relaxed, almost provocative. "We deserve this, don't we?" he said, raising the bottle as an invitation. I let out a low laugh and nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely." He poured the glasses, and we toasted in silence before taking the first sip. The wine went down smoothly, warming my chest. The atmosphere was calm, with only the sound of the wind rustling the trees outside and the faint crackling of the wood in the fireplace. But as the alcohol relaxed our bodies, something shifted in the air. Mr. Ernest's gaze became more intense, his movements slower, laden with intent. Words became unnecessary, and everything happened inevitably. What I had imagined since the moment we got into that car finally happened, and this time there was no guilt or hesitation, just desire taking over. This time, something in him had changed. Mr. Ernest allowed himself more. His touches were more careful. His gestures carried an attentiveness I had never felt before. It wasn't just desire, it wasn't just urgency. There was tenderness. There was something more there, something I couldn't name, but that made everything even more intense. Every moment was lived with a different kind of surrender, without guilt, without hesitation. Just the 2 of us, in the silence of that isolated cabin, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. And it was good, really good. If you want to hear this story uncut, exactly as it happened, click the link pinned in the comments. Kisses, and see you next time.